and I'm at a little law firm here in Washington, D.C. called Harris, Wiltshire Grannis. And what I'm going to try to share with you is just some real basics about how you ought to treat lawyers and how you ought to deal with them, because you're going to have to deal with lawyers if you have your own business. And so maybe the first thing you're going to face here as a wounded vet that you may face is obtaining vets, obtaining preferences, service disabled preferences of a variety of types and in a variety of circumstances, right? And oftentimes, we get called, or lawyers get called, when there's a problem, right? When somebody has denied you. And I've done a couple of cases at the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims involving denial of benefits. But I'm here to suggest that probably the better time to talk to a lawyer is to help you prepare the thing. One of the things that lawyers are really, really good at is helping fill out paperwork, right? Particularly lawyers who practice here in DC or in state capitals where they're dealing with administrative agencies all the time, which is kind of what I do. We're good at filling out paperwork, and we can make sure that you fill it out the proper way. And again, if you do it early, you can solve problems. So the last case that I did at the Court of Appeals, we ran up $60,000 in legal bills for a dispute that was less than $10,000, and we won. And then the VA refused to pay our legal bills because they said we ran up too much money. And again, that's sort of a frustrating story. But again, the point is kind of the earlier you can do this, sort of the better you are. And that's actually a general rule. The earlier you can find a lawyer, the better it is. The later you wait until you talk to one, kind of the worse and more expensive it gets. So setting up a company, kind of my rule of thumb is that if you are the sole member of a company that you want to set up, you go ahead and use LegalZoom or anybody and just kind of set it up in any way you want, because they will have decent enough papers that you can sign and decent enough forms, right? But if you have anybody other than yourself involved, you really, really want to have a lawyer involved to make sure that the documents are set up right. So what happens if there's a dispute? What happens if what happens if all the people who are forming the company don't want to be in the company anymore? I've recently helped out a vet who was involved in a particular business where after a few years, the three members of the business didn't agree on stuff. And the agreement that was written didn't really explain very well kind of what's supposed to happen in terms of those disagreements. And let me also say that, if you are involved with a member of your family or your brother-in-law or something like that, it's even more important to get a lawyer involved at the beginning, because what happens if your brother-in-law is no longer your brother-in-law? What happens to the company then? Those are things that lawyers will help you kind of think through. Let me just say one other thing about setting up the companies. Why do you set up a company? Why do you have an LLC or a incorporated company? The entire idea is that they can't sue you if the company does something wrong. They can't go after your house or your car or your family's assets. And so what that means is that you've really got to you really got to make sure that when you set up the company, you actually follow the formalities, right? You don't mingle your money with the company's money. You don't sort of write on your own stationery, you write on the company stationery. That sort of thing is important. That there are preferences given to disabled veteran-owned businesses, and those preferences can be very meaningful. And in fact, those preferences there are a bunch of folks that 100 Entrepreneurs has worked with that have made a lot of money in industries and on projects for which they're the beneficiary of preferences. And I'm just here to tell you that is not something to mess around with, right? You do not want to try to fill out your forms seeking preferences yourself. You want somebody who understands the rules. And you really, really need to avoid anything remotely appearing to be fraud or shell games, right? And this kind of happens a lot where you'll have somebody who is not eligible for the preferences try and use a veteran who is eligible for the preferences to gain, to gain use of the preference, right? You say like, I'll set up this company where somebody else is actually in control of the company, but the veteran is sort of the figurehead, right? And those are the sorts of things that the Department of Justice and others take a real keen interest in. And look, the rule here is and as I'll say a lot, right? If it seems wrong, it probably is wrong. And if you think that you can kind of depend on a real complicated scheme to get away with something that seems wrong, I'm here to tell you that that's not a great idea. So now we're getting into the kind of the day-to-day life of your company, right? And what you're going to be doing in many cases is negotiating contracts, right? Negotiating contracts with suppliers, negotiating contracts with your customers sometimes, negotiating contracts with your employees. And a lot of folks kind of think, well, boy, if I have a real long contract that has a lot of crazy words, that's what I really need to keep me safe, right? And it's just not the case, right? It's just not the case. What you want is a contract that you can understand and you know exactly how it works. And candidly, if your lawyer can't tell you how a contract works, you need to get yourself another lawyer. So that we had a wounded vet who actually was given a house through the Tunnels to Towers program up in New York. And I was asked to take a look, and it's not surprising that if somebody wants to give you a house, there's a lot of paperwork to look through. But they asked me, he asked me to look at it, and I looked at it, and one of the things in that contract was a provision basically saying that those guys could take away the house anytime they wanted to for more or less any reason. And we saw that, and it's not a great thing if you're living in your house happily and somebody decides they want to take it away from you. So we were able to go to Tunnels to Towers and say, like, look, this seems like a sort of crazy provision. Can you take it out? And they did. But the point is that that my job was to make sure that he understood every jot and tittle of what he was signing up for when he got a free house, right? And that's the sort of thing that the lawyers can do. And then you see the last point here, which is my dad's favorite point. If you don't trust the other side of the contract, just as if you don't trust your business partners, a contract is really no substitute here. People are creative, lawyers are creative. There's always a way to read a contract one way or another, no matter how hard you try. And so again, if you don't think that a contract, if you don't think that a particular situation makes sense, and if you don't trust the other side to treat you honestly, then don't sign the contract. There's incorporation. There's limited liability partnerships. There's limited liability corporations. There's S corps, and they mostly differ in terms of tax treatment. And to be perfectly candid with you, I'm not a tax lawyer, and I don't understand the tax treatment in any kind of helpful way. From the general legal perspective, they all kind of do the same thing, which is that they protect your personal assets from what the company is doing, right? They all manage to do the equivalent of incorporation. I think that one of the differences with respect to limited liability corporations is that each member is not necessarily liable for the misdeeds of another member. And that's sort of a big difference. But again, my strong suspicion is that if you are starting out your own business, at least when you're starting out, it's much more important that you do one of these than that you pick the right one of those. You can always kind of change that up, as you become successful, if it turns out that there's a real tax benefit of doing, say, a C Corp over something else. I got an email from a colleague last night, and it said, looking for a tough litigator in Colorado. And we have a client that has fiber optic telecommunication systems, and it says they're having difficulty with their the construction company that built their facility. I don't know exactly what the facility is. And he said it's not a large amount at dispute, but basically this construction company has really done us wrong. They've really done our client wrong, and their lawyer is a real asshole. And so they want somebody who's really tough and can really do that. He sent that around, and the guy who sent it around is a very smart lawyer. He's a colleague of mine. He's a friend of mine. But what I was thinking was, boy, this sounds like something where the client might need advice, right? Or might need to think about it, because on the one hand, the client feels like, he or she has been done wrong, that some injustice has been done to him. And to make things worse, the other side hire this super jerky lawyer who's gonna threaten and yell and stomp up and down. And boy, I need to get myself a real tough lawyer to kind of yell back at him, right? And sometimes that's in fact the answer, right? Sometimes in fact that's what you got to do, but that is often a recipe for spending $1 million on a $100,000 dispute, right? Because legal fees, lawyers bill by the hour, right? And those hours, all those time that your lawyer is arguing with the other side's lawyer about some document and where it came from, what about, it gets expensive. So part of the lawyer's job is in a way almost like a therapist, right? Part of the lawyer's job is to be able to tell the client, look, okay, here's what's at stake. Here's how much money it's going to cost. How should we handle this to get you in the best place? Not to make you feel better, or how to get in the best place. And I will tell you, I have had pro bono clients who said, you know what? I actually want to spend money because the other side, I want to punish the other side. Even if I end up in a worse position, I really want to go to the other side. And I've had to say, that you can do that, but you can't do that with me as your lawyer for free, right? You got to pay for your lawyer if you're doing this to kind of make yourself feel better. So again, this doesn't mean that you never should litigate, right? That there's time when you have to litigate, and you should find a good, tough litigator when you have to litigate. But in general, a bad settlement is better than good litigation. And the point I'm trying to make is that it's your lawyer's job to help you figure out whether you're in a situation that you absolutely have to litigate. And the one thing to be careful of course, is that since lawyers bill by the hour, they have a financial incentive to tell you to litigate, right? Because that just makes them a lot of money. And again, what you need is a lawyer who will put your interests in front of their own interests. And again, you should use your trusted contacts to find people who are good at this. Or candidly, you should call Harris, Wiltshire Grannis, and we will find you somebody if it's not something we can do ourselves. Discovery means that you got to turn over a bunch of your documents to the other side, right? So I'm representing a big client right now in litigation with somebody who produced some television programming. And we think the other side's a jerk, and they think that we're jerks. But one of the things that will happen if we actually go to litigate is that we're going to, they'll get to see all of our documents, and we'll get to see all of their documents, right? And so, first of all, the process of going through those documents is what runs up your legal bill. But it also means that people can see your emails, right? So if you get nothing out of this, whenever you send an email, you should send that email understanding that somebody else might get to read it. It might show up in court, right? So before you shoot off an angry email, and this means you, Bob Nilsson, you should make sure that that is an email that you are happy to have read in court by the other side. So if you want.